with our Indigenous people here in Australia. Yes, we need to do something. We need to try to rectify the issue. But the problem is that what government is suggesting is not workable. It's not a solution. And it's certainly not a solution to say we have this special group of people that are going to get special rights and special things, and they get to just dictate what policy is going to be over the rest of us. That's not a solution. And even if it was, what you do is you centralise power within that group, and you don't help everybody within the group.
We've hit that time of the day where we talk about our greater wealth. I've got the shaved monkey right beside me today, which is quite frankly a bit distressing. Look what he's fired with. Look what, look what's in the cylinders. But over there in the world of Zoom with this amazing background, tell you what, we will rock you. We have, yes, Derek Whittaker and Shaq as well. Great to have both of you boys here. And I think we should just jump straight into the show. Let's face it, we're doing things a bit differently today because we're in these different locations making it all happen. Derek, how are you, and what's on the show today, mate?
I'm well. It's great to join you guys again. Thanks to this wonderful technology. I want to talk today, kick it off with this insidious manipulation of history that's going on, that's coming out in the world elites, making us all feel guilty and resulting in economic policies and decisions being made. Let me give you an example. I mean, we have got to... Lance Wallner, a commentator on these sort of things, has claimed that the elites want to produce anarchy in France, USA, and Germany with their border policies that are going on, right? And, guilting you that you should let these people in. They've had it tough and all this sort of thing. And we're seeing the kickback going on in France. We're seeing, of course, this policy being a big issue in the United States, where you've got human trafficking cartel, putting these people over the borders and taking advantage of this. We're also seeing this problem in Germany, Ireland, United Kingdom, and now in our nation, Australia. There's this guilt that's going on. We see this happening in terms of Australia being used in the Voice to Nation, the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage 2021 Act, where, you need to owe this to them. And my concern is that this is a strategy that's being used globally for people to lose their rights to freedom. And of course, in some cases, their land. We've seen in the Netherlands, the French farmers fighting for their land, their dirt, which they, of course, feed many in the food bowl. And it's interesting with all this going on, the resistance that's occurring to this motion, when you've got an independent movie called Sounds of Freedom coming out, putting heat on the open border on the US. That's probably the political result that will occur. And you've had a movie that has really taken the movie industry by storm with the big July 4th going on. You would have noticed that Jim Caviezel, who was the actor and, of course, The Passion of the Christ, has become the key actor in The Sound of Freedom. This unlikely box movie has taken $40 million after 6 days of release. $40 million.
It's number one. It's absolutely number one. Simple as that.
It's hilarious because it's kicking Hollywood's ass.
Yeah.
and of course, you've got the left-wing media, mainstream media, trying to downplay it and saying, it's all that QAnon, which technically there is no QAnon. There's only Q and then there's a non. All right. But the media think that it's one and the same, and it's not actually. So it's really fascinating to see this play out. And this is against a huge, the Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. I mean, that's a big sequel.
Sorry, you got that. I think you misread. It's Dial of Dementia.
Oh, was the Biden starring
Yes,
that? Was
yes,
it?
yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
I missed that.
Now, were they using the nose candy as the cure for that?
No comment.
Bit of
So
big
getting
power.
back to my original point here, there's almost this guilt. You should feel guilty about what's happened in the past,
Crazy.
which is making credible political decisions, which will have economic decisions upon businesses, farmers. It's really absurd. And we've got to put this to light and say, look, why should we feel guilty about it? Guilt is not an emotional manipulation that we should use in any financial decision. We want freedom for everybody. And it's when you have an objective take on what's going on that you can make smart financial decisions where everybody prospers and wins in the game.
Well, we tend to make very poor decisions financially when emotions get involved. Let's face it, right?
Well,
So,
that's why I rail so much against you conservatives, because you guys talk about marriage and love. If you think guilt is a precursor to making bad decisions, wait till you see what happens when you fall in love. Because decisions
it's kind of funny because as Shaq was saying that, he was staring directly at Derek. So I'm like, I wonder what's happened in the last couple of years to cause that sort of a
special relationship.
We're doing a lot of strategic planning here, and every time around the dinner around with my family, that Shaq launches into advice about women. So I've created this jingle. It's called Shaq's Advice on Women, and then he launches into this advice, advising this younger bloke amongst us, this young.
You know what we need to do?
We're making that.
We need to get Shaq and Shaq's advice into what's the show, the relationship show that we do.
Oh yeah, all about relationships.
All about relationships. We've got to get Shaq in as well.
But I did try to make it more young friendly. So we have a young man down here who turned 12, and I said, "Look, let me give you advice on girls." Right? It's a different thing based on what I did when I was in high school, and the successes and failures. But let's get back to what Derek's talking about. Look, trying to rectify some overhangs from the past is actually quite reasonable, but not when government is trying to do it by government decree. Can you please, anybody here, name for me a government program or a government incentive that's actually worked? They screw it up all the time. So if you actually want these things to be fixed, it's not going to happen by government. And if I can just give an example. So I'm Indian by blood. Aaron claims to be.
He's an albino Indian, and I'm Burmese, so like we've got the whole lot. So it's all good.
I believe I'm a Jaffa. I am chocolate on the inside, my friend. But okay.
But my family were taken many generations ago. Sorry, my family were taken from India and put in Fiji. Now, when Fiji asked for its independence and the Fijians wanted their country back, which I think is fair enough, it's a reasonable thing for them to ask for. The Indians were kind of in this difficult position because India didn't want to bring them back to India. And in fact, the Prime Minister of India, in fairly recent times, she came over, and when Indians asked, can we, have Indian citizenship? She said, you have your own home now. And my personal opinion is that England should say, you know what, there's only 400,000 of you. We brought you over there. You know what, we're going to grant you British citizenship. So if you're talking about reparations or you're talking about trying to make up for the sins of the past, there are certain things that you can do. But blindly giving money or instituting policies where the person who's actually affected isn't really benefiting. It's often a special interest group that's benefiting, and the people at the top of that group are benefiting the most. That's not a solution. And I think that's a big part of the reason why we have so much division. And we're also seeing things where, what's his name, Larry Elder, who went to California to challenge Gavin Newsom on the recall election, gets depicted by the LA Times as being the black face of white supremacy. Look, if you don't agree with someone's political opinions, fair enough, right? We're not always going to agree, but we can exchange ideas, but don't call people names all the time. Let's just discuss the issues. So I think if we're going to make real progress, we have to get past that division. We have to be able to see past our differences. And if we can't do that, it's us to blame, right?
Well, I think a big part of it is we need to embrace our differences, right? Okay, it's life is good when it's interesting, right? And it's not interesting if everyone's alike. So, this whole, at the moment, I see, this reparations, I see all of this trying to effectively bring us into one world and all that kind of carry on. I think it's actually counterproductive. I mean, I think to myself, why would I get in a plane and fly all the way to, say, Italy, right? Okay, because I want to see the culture and all that sort of thing, be with Italian people. If it's home delivered here in Perth, right? It makes no sense. We should celebrate our differences. And to me, this has never been about reparations. To me, this is about pure and simple politics and control. That's how I see it. But, obviously interested in your opinions.
I'd love to jump in here because I'm a little bit different to all three of you here. So
yes, you are.
Very.
I'm trying to figure out how to word this properly.
Well,
I
I
don't
don't
think-
defend easily. I'm not sure about the audience. So if I were you,
I don't believe anyone should be blamed or punished for something that they didn't do.
Yeah.
And the way I see this is when you start making not just financial decisions based on guilt of what someone else did, especially political decisions, like this whole voice of parliament at the moment, that is just one massive guilt trip for something that 99.99999% of Australians didn't do. So why should I feel guilty for something that the British Empire did?
Because guilt's powerful, mate.
Why should I have to
Politically,
pay for a stuff up from the British Empire?
Well-
Why should I, as an Australian taxpayer, have to pay repercussions for native title, the stolen generation, when all of that was done by the British Empire?
so at the
Absolutely.
risk,
The bloody
at the
British should
risk
be
of-
paying for it, not us.
at the risk of saying, I love my life because every time I speak, the people on the right think that I'm some hardcore leftist, and all the people on the left think that I'm some hardcore right-wing conservative.
Nah,
But-
you're just Shaq.
At the risk of upsetting you all, which I do try to do because I like to poke a little bit.
Enjoy. Yeah.
If we just pivot away to America, I'll bring it back to Australia for a second. Let's say that I own a house, right? And you try some trick and somehow you've managed to steal my house. It does really belong to me, but you've stolen the house and you've broken the law, you've stolen the house. And then you have children and your children live in my house and your grandchildren live in my house. And then, 80 years later, finally I'm able to get a result in court and I say, hey, that was my house, except I'm dead. So it wasn't me. It was my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. And your great-grandchildren say, well, we have this history in this house. We've lived here. Look at all the things that we've done. We've improved the house. We've built a swimming pool, this sort of stuff. And my great-grandchildren say, yeah, that's fine, but that was our house. We've been living out in tents in the middle of nowhere. That was our house that your ancestors stole from us. We want it back. I don't think if you put it in terms as simple as that it's easy to just say, well, suck it up. It happened 200 years ago or 100 years ago. So I do think that they have a point. And for example, the slaves the former slaves in America and their descendants, they can't point to the house and say, well, that was our house, because what was stolen from them was their labor, right?
Yeah.
They were forced to work and that work was stolen from them. So should there be something done to try to rectify that wrong? Yeah, I think there should be. What that thing should be, I don't know. I don't think that what they're proposing is a good idea. I think that's really the same here with our Indigenous people here in Australia. Yes, we need to do something. We need to try to rectify the issue. But the problem is that what government is suggesting is not workable. It's not a solution. And it's certainly not a solution to say we have this special group of people that are going to get special rights and special things, and they get to just dictate what policy is going to be over the rest of us. That's not a solution. And even if it was, what you do is you centralize power within that group, and you don't help everybody within the group. So we need to come up with something.
There's a very simple solution to all of this. So let's use, first of all, we'll go to the slaves. So you work out how much labor would have been at that time, and you give them the compensation in a monetary form, pay them for their labor. And then it stops. And then they're responsible for themselves. So let's use Aboriginal things. Why not?
That's not going to work in America because we're talking about something that happened a couple hundred years ago. So, so who do you compensate? The direct descendants.
Direct descendants.
Right, but they've been interbred with other people. And a lot of the people that are descendants of slaves, have white slave masters also in their family lines. What I'm saying is, I think if we want to tackle poverty, we want to tackle the imbalance in economic ability, there are ways to do that, and we should be able to talk about it. The problem is that no conversation can be had when we're passing this law, and it's generally coming from the left of government. We're going to pass this law, and if you oppose it, you're racist. And if you have to be part of the community that we're telling you we're trying to help, well, then actually you're a traitor to that community. You're a traitor to your race. You're the black face of white supremacy. That's where the problem comes. if we want to make progress on these issues, there's ways to do it, but it involves us having rational, calm conversations about it.
Well, I think
Using Larry Elder as the example there, just on the Larry Elder thing. I mean, that man is basically teaching people to use personal responsibility, right?
Yeah.
And not to live in the past. Very, very, very smart man. I mean, my God, he talks at about a million mile an hour. But very, very smart. And I think that, you know, ultimately he is trying to get people of color in the US to take responsibility for their lives and actually pick up their bootstrings and move on, right? That's not going to happen when you've got so much of the left who is using every ism, every every insult, right? The problem is exactly that. Like, okay,
there's no end date to it. They're saying, like, I get that your family, your generation, all of that were slaves. I get that. The thing is, like, for the white Americans at the moment is the white Americans currently did not enslave them.
That's right.
So why should they be punished and treated like shit? And like Aaron said, with all the isms, why should they be nailed with all the isms when they've done nothing wrong?
Because when you're losing an argument, you use an ism. That's the reality.
Granted, there are a few redneck dickheads that need a bullet, who are genuinely assholes, but they should be treated as they are. If you treat someone like purely, if I turn around and insulted Shaq in an offensive way just because his skin color is chocolate, then I should be treated as the asshole that I am.
Cool.
But have I ever treated you badly, Shaq?
Well, hang on. If you did that to me when nobody else was watching, I'd probably laugh at you. I don't need Derek, for example, to be offended on my behalf.
Spot on. So you're responsible for yourself, and that's not what's happening.
I should be upset. But let me just come back to something, because this is the other thing that they do. Why are we being judged by skin color? Right? Let's talk about whites just for a moment. So whites are being blamed for everything, okay? But if we go back in history, white people were really oppressed by other white people. Do you want to be a poor peasant in Victorian England, or, you know, England of 200 years ago? Of course not.
Hang on, we weren't humans back then. So.
When Australia first, when we first received our convicts, all the power was with these really aristocratic British, high-class people. And desperate people, they weren't just convicts that they did something particularly wrong. Sometimes they actually deliberately would steal stuff and then go and dob themselves in order to get free passage to Australia so they could try to have a better life. And if you go to Port Arthur, down in Tasmania, I know most people associate that with the shooting, but if you go down there, you'll actually find that one of the wardens of the prison there was actually a former convict who reformed his life and ended up becoming the warden at that prison. That's the sort of thing that we need to be looking at. Is we've had some very, very poor whites that have been oppressed for a very long time, that have come to New World countries to create a better life for themselves. To go back to the United States, there were signs everywhere: Irish need not apply for this job. Catholics need not apply for this job. There's all sorts of discrimination that's occurred all through our history. So now we fast forward 200 years and all of a sudden we ignore those differences and say, you have the same skin color as somebody else from a different country in Europe. I mean, most white people in Australia and the United States came here after World War I, or more especially World War II. We're going to say, you've got the same skin color in our eyes as somebody who oppressed us 200 years ago. That's ridiculous. That's like saying to me that you can't tell the difference between the part of India that my family's from and a different part of India. You might not be able to, but Indians can. It's really offensive to delete our...
Absolutely.
What I think is going on here, if we go back to the original thing here, there's two parts to this. The elites are pushing on, I think, in Australia, the guilt of the past. You get legislation to take control of land and people's wealth and businesses. The other part of this is a different scenario of what's going on in the US border and across the English Channel, and what they've been pushing into France, and what they've been pushing into Ireland. They have gotten people they're calling them, the right are calling them of war-like age men getting into these and causing havoc in these countries. Right? Absolute havoc, where they've got knives on the streets attacking people, breaking.
I'm not sure they can repair the damage that's been done to Germany. I really don't. You think of Germany, used to be such a massive power in Europe, the center of finance in Europe, effectively, right? And certainly the industrial side of things. And the damage that's been done by their immigration under Merkel, I don't know if it can ever be cleaned up. I really don't. And
have a look at Sweden. All the Swedish people are flying to Spain.
It's crazy.
Because you just don't go anywhere anymore.
But there's
something Swedish is so happy and loving.
But there's something very fundamental here, like right at the basis of it all, right? Okay. Why in the world, at any level, are we basing our judgment of people on the color of their skin? It makes no sense at all. Like,
we're treating people based on the way they've treated you. If someone treats you like an arsehole, you just don't deal with them.
Martin Luther King nailed it, right? How long ago? What, 60 odd years ago? Okay. Why in the world, 60 years later, are we actually going, we're regressing, we're going backwards, right? It makes no sense to me.
So how do we fix it? The simple thing is, once someone starts going, oh, you're a racist, just stop dealing with them. Don't
walk away.
Just let them just fade away into the history.
But unfortunately, what are you going to do? I mean, I've stopped buying Gillette products because I thought that ad was terrible, right? I think most people, funnily enough, on the left as well, aren't buying Bud Light. Unilever at the moment is having issues because they own Ben & Jerry's in the United States. How much stuff do you boycott? Nigel Farage just had his bank account closed at Coutts & Co. in the UK, right? And is that because he's a politically exposed person, or is it because of his involvement in Brexit? Are we reaching a point where you having a political opinion that isn't agreed to by the people in charge is going to deperson you? This is because technology is what it is. It's worse than what it was in previous times in World War II and previous regimes. This is a real problem. I think it's a really significant problem. And now we're looking at this disinformation rules that are coming out by the Labor Party. They tried doing this in the United States. They're trying to do this in the UK. They're trying to do this across Europe. And here's the scary thing. You might actually think, if it doesn't get passed, you might think, okay, well, that's great. It didn't get passed. Everything's good. But you know what? The fact they're talking about it, it may not get passed now. It might just take a generation, but it will get passed because that's what they do. They just plant the seeds and plant the seeds.
Yes, this has happened. This has happened before, right? Funny little country I just mentioned with Merkel. But, let's just wind the clock back, 90 years here, okay? Really Ministry of Information, 90 years is crazy, but there you go.
That shows how old you are, Aaron.
I was there. No, I feel like it. But it's just like, okay. Thanks, mate. I appreciate that very much. I've got a little saying in life, okay, and I think about...
And the fact is...
Yes, that's one of them. That is one of them. Okay. To know where we're going, you need to look where we've been. Okay, history will always expose what's going on today, right? There is nothing new, right? It's all been tried before. So we have seen this. We saw 90 years ago. It didn't work very well. I smile about it only because.
So what Lance is doing here, you bring it back to the point, is calling out that spirit of guilt and going, hey, this is not on. It's not on. You've raised another one. I'd like to get into our next topic here, Shaq, about technology.
Sorry, can I just ask one last question, just really quickly? Tell me who the president of the United States was 100 years ago. So the thing is, you're going to have to Google it. You're going to have to find out the information. Here's what really worries me. We live in a reasonably contentious time right now. When people look back at history, you always hear media say, oh, people look back at this time in history and they're going to think we're crazy. When people look back at history, what are they actually going to know? The media is so biased and so one-eyed and one-sided. What are people going to look at? They're not going to actually know how we actually felt. All they're going to know is how the media felt about things, and the media is not reflective of us at all.
Absolutely. But here's my hope. My hope is because of the technology change and the fact that, we've got a generation now of everyday people who have become the media. Okay.
Come on. They take photos of the dinner every single day.
So. Yes. So I would hope there's enough documentation that will infiltrate the narrative. I agree. In the past, it's absolutely been the case. Right. And I now look back and I read news articles from 100 years ago and I think, oh my God, look what they were doing. Look at the way that they were directing you.
So that's a great.
People in the future are unfortunate enough to be able to see what we put out in the media. All they're going to see is a lot of people sticking their bums out, eating good food, and Dylan Mulvaney. that's what they're going to think our generation was about. Because, and they're not going to have any kind of sense of whether politics was right or wrong. They're going to actually believe that half of the country and half of the world was extremely racist, because that's what the media is pumping all of the time.
Well, you got to look at that with history, right? They've said that history is the narrative of the conqueror, and comedy is the language, the narrative of the conquered. So you could say that history has been manipulated through because it was so few writing on it. It's still the same thing coming up each time.
There's another way to look at this as well. Yes, when you go back in history, so the internet's going to be the great leveler now compared to 1945, because everyone's got access to the internet. Once it's on the internet, it's always there. There's always a way to re-dig it up. You can never, ever permanently remove something off the net. And the ability for people to go out, put a post out, put an article out, create a website. I think it's like $5 for a year to create a website. So the information will be there. They've just got to dig for it. The second thing is the bit that I find even more concerning about this, with the next paradigm shift going into the AI. So what's happening is AI is learning from what's actually in the media at the moment. So they're already teaching and training and manipulating the AI to have the leftist leaning on the political side. So, and that's where it's going to be really, really dangerous, because after a while, AI is going to be good enough that you'll just say, right, find anything that's conservative and destroy it. And that's what the AI will do, because it's the instructions given to it, not the AI itself, which is bad. It's just a tool.
Right now, there's a comedian called Isaac Butterfield, right, who is an Aussie guy.
Glorious beard.
Absolutely fantastic guy. Really good comedy, but a really amazing social commentator, right? And he's currently in front of the Human Rights Commission, wasn't it? For one of his jokes, because someone found his joke offensive. And he actually...
Did you see the full screening of that?
It's just ridiculous.
They literally asked him what were the 10 most offensive jokes that you've ever heard.
Yep.
And so he was repeating 10 of the most offensive jokes that he ever heard. So they just went and took like 3 seconds or whatever of him telling one of these jokes and put that to the Human Rights Commission.
Yep. It's absolutely ridiculous.
I'll just say, and you can send this video to Isaac Butterfield. Mate, if you want to be Mr. Conservative or Mr. Anti-establishment, and then you're going to jump behind banning greyhound racing because greyhound racing is so bad, try to find out what you're talking about first, champ, or shut up like you tell everybody else that you criticise too. Other than that, I think he's great.
Okay. I have not heard
he's got a glorious beard.
He has. I haven't heard his thoughts on greyhounds.
He put a post up criticising greyhound racing and talking about the animal cruelty that goes on in greyhound racing. Now, as you guys know, I'm a fairly well-known character within greyhound racing in Australia. So again, look, Isaac, I know you live in Victoria and all of that. Have fun. I agree with most things that you say, but when you go out there and you criticise all these leftoids for not knowing what they're talking about, and then you come out with that post on your Facebook page, having a crack at greyhounds, maybe you should know what you're talking about. So maybe contact one of us and we'll actually set you straight. But other than that,
sounds good.
Like Isaac Butterfield.
I'm happy to hear that, because for me that's new information, and I want to hear new stuff, because I like this here. Funny enough, every single side of the opinion here. Well, what I was going with bringing up old Isaac is he did an experiment very recently, last week, not long ago, whatever, about basically he chased up and found a article in one of the newspapers or one of the online papers, right, that was actually with this particular reporter. Anyway, when he did his research on the reporter, he discovered that the reporter actually wasn't real, and that the article had actually been written by AI. So if you just basically, he reverse engineered it, and that seems to be what's happening. So if you're looking at your really crap organizations, your Vice, your this, your that, or whatever, what you're finding is that now these reporters aren't even real. They literally are just using AI to write articles. So you put in, 5 different words, press the old go button, and look at that. Well, you're a
write an article on this topic with a left-leaning.
But I guess that's the question with AI, isn't it? Because we pay a lot of attention to the parts of our society that we actually aren't really that interested in, or that we might think is a bit odd or a bit disgusting or a bit strange. Now, Isaac Butterfield has this great love affair with vegan booty, who I believe has now finally left Western Australia, thank goodness.
No!
How much does the AI learn about Western society if what they judge Western society on is what we put on TikTok or what we put on Facebook or what we put on
There's
Instagram?
a reason I call it Tick Thought, because it's full of thoughts.
Thoughts?
Yeah.
So getting back to finance and technology and the way it's affecting it now, I'd like to get your take. We've done a lot of talking in the last few weeks about CBDCs, which are the centralized bank digital tokens that they want to bring out to replace money, cash, physical cash in your hand. They want to now issue it from the central banks, which puts the retail banks in a bit of a precarious position in terms of the usefulness. I think there'll still be a place for the retail banks, but anyway, that's a topic for another time. But we've been talking about what's going on. The central bank's buying up a lot of gold at this time, and the discrepancy around the US dollar. I would like to hear your take, Shaq, since we have you here today, on what you think about CBDCs.
Well,
let's sit back, shall we?
You want to go make a coffee?
Central banks buying up gold. You could actually argue that's responsible, considering that they're inflating their currency. So,
especially if they're New Zealand.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you, Jacinda. Lady Adair. Sorry, my sweetheart. Now, have I mentioned how I feel? Now, look, with CBDCs, what they're going to do, in my opinion, is they're going to talk about the benefits. I won't tell you about the downsides. So I'll talk about the benefits. It's easier for them to do this. It's easier for them to do that. Questions that I have is, if they get rid of the banks, which for bizarre reasons, the banks are like, yay, let's get rid of ourselves. If they got rid of the banks and you go for a home loan, is your home loan going to be dependent on your ability to repay that home loan? Or is it going to be decided by a government bureaucrat who's going to say, you're on our political side, you're not? I don't want to get too conspiratorial here, but as many people know, I smoke and I tend to drink a bit. Trying to cut down the smoking, but, those things that I do. So if I get sick later on in my life, does the government get to look at where I've spent my money and say, you spent, much more than other people spend on alcohol and cigarettes and gambling and all these terrible things that you've done. So therefore, we're either going to not give you care, or we're going to, make it more expensive for you to access that care. I think that's an issue, but it's not so much an issue, I don't think, for what everyone thinks, which is that government's going to do it, because I don't think government will. What I think government's going to do is exactly what they've done with tech, right? The government theoretically doesn't run the tech platforms, but they can see everything that you're doing, and they tell the tech platforms who to deperson, who to deplatform, etc.
It's called plausible deniability.
That's what they did with COVID. It wasn't.
So if they have access to your money, how easy would it be for them to say to the commercial banks, well, we have data that indicates that this person is voting the wrong way. Our AI indicates that this person's interests, based on what they look at in the media, based on where they spend the money, what donations they make, etc., indicate they have a certain political position, and we would like you to target them. I think that that's something that's far more likely to happen than an actual overt, in-your-face, government controlling everything that you do. And I have to say, and we'll probably get cancelled immediately as soon as I say it, but it's your show, not mine, so it's okay.
You're okay with that? That's okay.
Absolutely. Operation Mockingbird. Okay, we know, and it's very open, it's public information, that the CIA actually infiltrated media and had media people that were there to push propaganda. And even RFK has just talked about that just recently on a podcast, to push propaganda on the public to try to sway public opinion. I think that CBDCs is another way of them gaining information on us, and I don't think that we should tolerate that. I think it's inevitable. I think we're going to end up with it, but we have to work out what we want our lives to be. And if we're going to go down that path, we have to massively curtail the kind of power that government not just has now, but the kind of power that they're asking for, what they want to do.
Well, the thing is, everyone's like, oh, but they're going to track everything we're going to do. I hate to tell you this, they already do. If you pay for anything with a card, like a tap and go, whatever, on your bank card, they've got exactly how much you spent, where you spent it, and all that sort of shit. You take your mobile phone with you everywhere they go. They're already tracking everything you do on that side of things. They're already monitoring your social media page. The level of overreach the government already has to add it to CBDCs is already there. I think what they're going to do is it's going to make them a lot easier for them to lock certain people out of society. So like the Nigel Farages, the people who, let's say they set up like a heap of government foundations, trusts, and all that sort of stuff. It's going to make international transfers of money a lot easier to track. So when people do try to get out of a certain country, they're going to be able to track them from one country to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And I think that's where a lot of the problems are on rise.
Well, and they can do things like bail-ins. We've already seen banks like in Cyprus have done that. But there's nothing to stop them from just saying, hey, we're out of money. We need some of yours. Your superannuation fund, we're just taking 20%. And rather than having to physically do it, they can just hit a couple of keys on the keyboard and bang, that money's gone or it's been transferred to them. But also, they can do things like saying, well, we think that you've used too much petrol this week in your car.
And this is a really very genuine concern.
Absolutely.
It's a big concern. Absolutely.
I would argue too that your credits, we talk about how China has a social credit score and all that sort of stuff. I would argue they're already doing that with your own credit score here in Australia. The banks, you haven't paid your loan on time. Well, that's going to affect your ability to have a loan. And it's really, again, that Babylonian system that you've got to question and go, how do I get out of that? How do I get out of that system? And not
it's funny you should say that, Derek. I think if people do want to get out of the Babylonian system, they should look up bluskyfactory.com.au. Remember, drop the E off the U.
No, I will just say on that note, I don't think in Western countries that we're going to see government do it directly. No. Government's not going to do it directly. What government's going to do is, if they don't want you spending money in certain places, it'll be the banks that'll do it, or it'll be your health insurance provider that'll do it. That'll say, well, look, if you smoke, we know that you smoke because we can see where you're spending your money because we own the bank or whatever, and so therefore your premium is going to be a lot higher. And what they'll do, the way they'll pitch it is, well, what we're trying to do is to make sure that people that don't smoke aren't having to subsidize the prices of people that do smoke. So they'll always try and make it look like they're doing you a favor. Just like the topic of the day at the moment is this new Aboriginal Heritage Act. Okay. What they've done there, been very, very clever. If you're under 1,100 square meters, you're exempt, which is most people that live in Western Australia. Right? So it doesn't affect you. In fact, what they did was they actually streamlined that process. So most people in this state, the process was streamlined and is made slightly easier for now. Might get worse later, but for right now, it's a bit easier. And that's how they get it through.
So I've done some research into that one as well. So what happens is they're not so much making it exempt, you've already done it. So you've already paid for it once. So when they break the land from bushland to farmland or farmland to 1,100 square meter blocks for construction, they're meant to, keyword here, do a Section 18. The government probably didn't know which ones had a Section 18, which ones didn't. So they just went blanket, no, we can't be stuff checking this, so they're all exempt. It's laziness from the government.
No, it's not laziness. I don't think it's laziness. I think it's very deliberate because it doesn't affect most people.
Exactly.
If this was going to affect most people, you would see a huge hoo-ha up in Perth and other, very populated parts of Western Australia. You're not going to see that because most people aren't going to be affected. And that's exactly how they're going to do it with CBDCs and any other type of government control. They don't do it directly. They don't do it in your face. They kind of sneak behind other places. And I think big corporations, they love it because they can do it. And the most people are going to say, well, it didn't really affect me. I am not a vocal person. I'm not, somebody in the media, so I'm not going to be affected. If you're a Brexiteer, you're not affected. But if you're Nigel Farage, you just had your bank accounts closed and no other bank will open up an account for you, right? Wow. It's just a warning shot. It's just a warning shot, right? Yeah. Don't pipe up. Stay down there.
Can I go tinfoil hat for a moment? I've been doing a bit of research over the last. So this is full tinfoil hat conspiracy theory here, but I think it's worth mentioning.
Okay.
Shaq, how big of the GDP is property and mortgages within Australia? Just roughly.
I actually don't know. I don't look at Australian GDP that often, but it'd be a pretty reasonable chunk, I would say.
I've heard it's the third largest industry for GDP in Australia behind mining and farming.
Okay.
So I'm talking mortgages, stamp duty, and all that sort of stuff, the construction side of things. So what would happen if you made the application process insanely hard because I think the what they're doing to farmers is actually a smokescreen and a distraction to actually around property development. So let's say a property developer comes to process, all right, I've just purchased a big chunk of land. I'm going to subdivide it to make a whole heap of houses. And I'm going to destroy the land. So immediately there's legislation brought out that makes it a tier 3. So all of a sudden, instead of being, say, $500,000 to create this, say 20 blocks of land, it now costs $1 million. So it's double the cost because of all the permits they've got to get. So that property developer goes, you know what, stuff it too hard, not enough profit. I'm going to go to South Australia, Queensland, Tasmania. I'm going to go somewhere else and do it in another state. All right. So all of a sudden the government federally turns around and goes, you know what, let's bring in 1.2 million people who need houses to live in. So all of a sudden there's a massive demand for property, but there's no houses being created. We already have a massive homelessness problem, 30,000 people. We've got insane amounts of people coming back into the country. The property development is piss weak at the moment, especially in WA. And federally, they're saying, we're doing everything we can to create more state housing, and there's only building 30,000 houses across Australia. So what's going to happen is there's going to be a massive supply and demand deviation. It's going to skyrocket the price of houses through the roof. Let's say interest rates stay at 4%, but the average house goes from $520,000 to $800,000. Doing some quick maths in your head, how much extra is that in interest repayments to the banks? How much more money in stamp duty, which is based off a percentage of the value of the property, is going through to everyone? How much more money in rent can investors now charge everyday people? How many people on an average income will be able to save up a 10% deposit without begging the government for assistance and buying half their house, or renting for life because they can't even afford to buy in the outskirts? Has everyone else heard of the term "you will own nothing and be happy"?
Look, I think with all due respect, Travis, I think you might be overstating it just a little bit. If the scenario that you're suggesting was to happen, inflation would bring everybody up. So the $800,000 house would be, relatively speaking, still affordable to people because inflation would have gone up by that amount. Yeah. But I get the point that you're making, and California is a really good example of this. The reason why housing is so expensive in California is because of regulations. But who in their right mind would vote if you own property in California? The last thing you're ever going to do is vote for less regulations, because if you vote for less regulations, it's going to make housing more affordable, which by definition means that your property prices are going to go down.
Well, so now, who in Australia is looking for more housing regulations versus less housing regulation?
Well, the people that already own houses want more regulations.
Right, Labor. A lot of their policies are about getting the government to regulate housing even more.
Well, I don't want to be a partisan, right? And again, I've never voted for the Labor Party, but not trying to be partisan. But you don't think that very wealthy Liberal Party members who have properties in, especially the lower North Shore of Sydney, love the regulations that prevent their houses from being built out? Let's take my area in Western Australia, Nedlands and Dalkeith, right? You try subdividing a block in Nedlands and Dalkeith and see how you go, right?
Oh, you would never do it.
Exactly.
Was it NIMBYism?
All those Liberal Party voters, they love those regulations, don't they? So that's the thing. I don't think that this is as simple as saying it's a government top-down approach with these things. I think that it's the people. The people vote certain ways in their own interest, which is perfectly reasonable, fair enough. But we have to make sure that government is doing what's fair. Now, the counter argument to what you've just said is, let's look at New Zealand. Now, my great girl that I love so much, my dear lady.
Here it comes. Pucker up the lips.
She decided to cool the property market by putting restrictions on foreign investment into New Zealand. Well, what does cooling the market mean? Does that not mean that you are deliberately dropping the price of real estate or holding back the price from rising? Absolutely. Is that what we're suggesting that we should do? So I get your point that, yes, of course, there's going to be a lot of beneficiaries to more regulations. but I think you might be slightly overstating it. I'll just come back to the banks because I am a banker. I don't
Is that a
think
B?
B or a W?
a rise in. I don't support the Dockers. It's all right. I think a rise in interest rates. You have to remember it's not actually about the rise in interest rates. It's about the spread between what banks' cost of funding is and what they actually receive. So I think the issue is more nuanced than just it being a cash grab by the banks. And the thing is that what you've just said is kind of an obvious answer. That's why it's probably not true. There's probably a lot more going on than just that.
Speaking of banks, let's move on to the next topic. Argentina is now allowing people to open accounts in Chinese yuan currency. Now, that in of itself is not a huge hurrah. You can go in Australia to your bank, a particular bank, and you can open up a foreign currency account. The issue is when it goes onto the international front. Argentina started to pay for Chinese imports in yuan rather than US dollars in April, as China pushes for greater use of its currency in bilateral trade settlements. Now, here's where it gets interesting. There are now 8 nations starting to use yuan for international settlements. Well, let's have a look at what those nations are. And this is where it's interesting, where it gets played out. Russia. Well, what happened to Russia? Sanctions. We're going to freeze your ability to also use SWIFT international payments. So what are they going to do? They still want to buy and sell. So they're now using the ruble. And, of course, there are nations who want to trade with them. Saudi Arabia, Brazil, Argentina, Bangladesh. We've got Pakistan, Iraq, and Thailand. And you've got interesting sort of scenarios in some of these nations where there's a Russian company that wants to do a deal and build something for one of these nations. And the negotiations, well, we'll do part of it in our local currency and part of it in Russian rubles and this sort of stuff. So it's an interesting play. Now, of course, all international transfers, it's still about 90% of those are done in US dollars. So it's certainly not going away in a hurry. It's something that, over the medium long term is what's going on. But the fact that there's probably an increase in interest from other nations to go outside that framework is fascinating, in how the United States will play that out, being the biggest economy in the world.
And obviously, you guys know a trillion times more than I do on this, but I'm interested in your opinion. The reality is, okay, with Biden, okay, just thank you, printing more and more and more money, okay, and basically making the greenback worth less and less constantly, right? Okay, devaluing it and creating all this inflation because of it, okay? And all those other countries in the BRICS countries, nations who are going into other, the Chinese currency, obviously the Russian currency, right? Okay. I personally see it causing the petrodollar, I see it, the US dollar, just crashing in the medium term. I don't think it's a long-term thing. I think it's relatively short. How wrong am I?
What'll be interesting is how US Treasury play this out, right? In its relationship with the Federal Reserve. I think that those questions will come in, and I think there's a lot of investigations going into the organizations with 3-letter abbreviations, right? In the United States, your FBI's, your CIA's, and will the Fed be next? IRS as well. I mean, gosh. IRS agents running around armed with guns and, showing up at your doorstep. Hey, you owe the taxman how many thousands with a loaded weapon.
As long as your name's Biden, you're okay. Don't worry about it. No stress.
And you got little bags to white handy floss.
It's only a misdemeanor for him.
How long will it be before those attentions turn to the banks? That's going to be interesting. Now, remember, of course, history is fascinating in the age of Abraham Lincoln, who printed the greenbacks. And he funded his war effort through that and allowed it, legalized it to be legal tender to settle your tax debts with that. Soldiers used it to fund the Civil War. And of course, that was against the money changers at that time. So they fought it.
As they should have.
And it was still used. So this relationship between Treasury, US Treasury, and of course, the centralized bank is going to be really fascinating as that plays out globally.
So
interesting word.
No, you go.
I've watched a lot of those financial history videos where they're talking about the change of currencies, and as one society goes up, then it comes down. Another one sort of comes up and goes down. But generally, when those two currencies sort of cross, there's generally a war around that point, like major wars. So I'm wondering, a lot of them will also say, as one currency is going down, they'll either retaliate massively and then secure their spot, or they get defeated. Now, the question is, will this lead to a full-blown Third World War?
What with the
with troops
trans,
on the ground.
with the trans and Ravo army that the United States has. So,
Yeah.
How can that fail? How can that fail?
let me just say, because I know you talked about the money changes. Um, you know, Abraham Lincoln, one of the worst presidents the United States ever had. And what did he do?
Glorious beard, though. Come on, he had a beard like of champion.
I think Butterfield, is reincarnated, I think. But no, one of the worst presidents that the United States ever had by a long way, who basically wanted to try to centralize power by making a national currency called the greenback during a civil war where half the country wanted to secede. But anyway, we won't get into that. What I will just say, you were talking before about the BRICS nations and some of these others. I'm not sure if you or many of our viewers would be aware of this, but almost 1/3 of the world is currently under sanction. Did you know that?
I didn't know it was that high.
I knew it was high,
US,
just not that high.
The US has sanctioned almost 1/3. I think it's 30%, 29, 30%. Somebody can fact check that. It's somewhere around there.
Hey, Zuckerberg, fact check it.
Yep.
What are we expecting those countries to do? Like, are those countries going to go, oh, okay, well, we're so bad, naughty me, I'm just going to sit here and be poor?
Hey, if it's double up, it's, oh, give me harder, Daddy.
Like, naughty you. So you're naughty and I'm naughty. And no, that's not what happens, right? It's like if you're in school and you're on detention, okay, you don't not talk to the other kid that's on detention with you, do you? Right? What happens? You're on detention, you're stuck in the same room, you become great friends. I can tell you how many girlfriends I met in detention when I was in year 7, right?
Hey, welcome to the Breakfast Club, right?
Exactly. So what do we expect these countries are going to do? What great affinity towards the West, or what great respect towards the West is Russia supposed to have, or Bangladesh, or Iraq, or Thailand? What are they supposed to do? Go, okay, well, we better not trade with those other bad countries because America, they've done so much for us. Of course they're not going to do that. Australia will do that because we're a close ally. But I think we have to be realistic about what's in the national interests of other countries. And of course, if 30% of the world can't trade with us easily, and 30% of the world or a third of the world is under sanction, obviously they're going to look for opportunities to trade amongst themselves. Wouldn't you?
I'm waiting for
you were living in those sorts of countries?
Of course.
The issue at hand is the amount of regulations that you have to jump through and the complexity of actually being able to comply with taxes. So if I can just give you one example. So obviously I earn money in multiple different currencies around the world. When I don't pay tax here because I'm not a resident of Australia anymore. I'm a citizen, but I'm not a resident. But if I was, and I wanted to pay tax in Australia, and I've earned money, and let's just say US dollars, right? What is the rate that I convert those US dollars into Australian dollars? Is it the rate when I actually realize the gain and earn the money? Is it the average rate over the year? Is it the rate that the banks say is on the day that my taxes are due? Do I average everything? I mean, you'd have to recalculate that every time. And the problem, of course, is what happens when you go to make deductions against foreign income. And so for somebody like myself that earns money in 28 different currencies, becomes a little problematic, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I need to have a far more simple, not just tax structure, but also for my businesses, I need to be able to not have to jump through red tape all the time, because frequently what you find is when there's lots of red tape, there's a lot of stuff in it that just doesn't exist, right? Where I want to do this thing and no legislation or rule actually exists on it. And when you ask the regulator, whether it be the SEC in the USA or ASIC here in Australia, you ask the regulator what they say to you, we can't give you an answer, go get legal advice. So you go and get a lawyer, you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on legal advice, and the lawyer says, well, actually, it's untested, so you're in the grey area. Well, I don't want to be in the grey area. I'm trying to comply. I don't want to have something
over get
in trouble over.
Yeah, and then if you do test it, how much is it going to cost to take in Australia? I'm pretty sure things like that would have to go to the High Court, don't they?
It depends on the system, but to get to the High Court, what are you going to do? Spend 15, 20 years of your life fighting, and how much money that's going to cost you? Here's an easier option. Just leave.
Yeah, exactly. So the Australian tax system is too complicated. They're trying to get their fingers into too many pies. To be honest with you, this isn't just me personally. I love the idea of a single tax rate, regardless of who you are. I personally think welfare payments, I know it comes from taxpayers' money, but this is the only fair way that I can think of doing it. Even your welfare payments should be taxed at this exactly the same rate. Any money you bring in should be taxed at exactly the same rate. Now, if you don't earn the money in Australia, don't pay tax in Australia. As simple as that. You should be paying tax in the country that you earn the money in.
Look, I'm a bit of a fan of the non-domicile taxation rules that the UK, Malta, and the Republic of Ireland has. I think some others have it as well, which is a remittance-based taxation system. What you earn locally, you're required to pay tax on locally. Anything that you earn overseas is only taxed when you bring it back in. So if you've got assets overseas, you can let them grow in a tax-free environment, and then when you bring them back in, it gets added to your income and you pay tax on it. I think that that's quite a reasonable system. And it's
easy. That's simple.
Yeah.
Like,
so that would mean, just to put this into context, that would mean that if I was to live and reside in one of those countries where I'm paying tax, I'm not talking about a Dubai or a Monaco or something like that, where I'm actually paying tax, my tax return would be one page, right?
Oh, wow. Fantastic. Isn't that great?
As opposed to the enormous tax return that I would have to do now if I was to still live in this country.
Yeah. So why, again, I don't understand why we can't actually work towards something like that. So going back to your original question about the businesses and all that sort of stuff, how would a business in Australia compete to a country that does have like a much lighter restrictions? Why would we have to go to that place if everything was easier to do in Australia? Even with those restrictions, even with those working conditions, it'd create a situation where you wouldn't have to rely on these countries that take advantage of kids or really poor working conditions.
Well, I'll tell you what happens in this country, and it happens in most other Western countries that I'm aware of. If you start your own business and you're relatively successful, right? Maybe you've got 5 employees. The government will hold you up and say, "Oh, look how business friendly we are." We've given them Centrelink used to have this thing where if you started your own business, you would get like the same as a dole payment for a couple of years. You know, they said, look at what we've done. We've given you this tax break. We've done all this stuff. Look how fantastic we are. This is great. We really want people to be successful. And this guy right here is a great example of that because he has this business and he employs, 6 people, right? Okay. But there comes a point where they turn on you, where you've earned too much. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you've earned too much, they won't tell you what that point is. But as soon as you've earned too much, then all of a sudden they go, you're a thief. You're an oppressor. You have made money, because it's a zero-sum game to these people. You have made money because of these poor people. In fact, you are the cause of all those people being poor. That child is
you hire all these poor people
because of you. And if you don't pay more, it's immoral. And so now we're going to charge more in taxes. Now we're going to, level all these regulations at you. And that's what we end up with. So I think, to answer your question, most people in this country don't see it's a problem because most people in this country are going to be helped and assisted at first. And not everybody's going to be successful. Even those people that are successful probably had a whole heap of failures first. So there's a small group of people that are successful and everybody else is actually being helped by government. So when government says, look, in order for us to help you, to give you all these opportunities, we have to tax that guy. Look how much money that guy has. That's what ends up happening. So for me, I just want to be out of that system altogether. And that's why I left Australia.
Spot on. And that's what it means to be a sovereign individual, because if you don't like the system you're in, get out.
Yep. I like to get inside of my feminine side here. That's why I wear the pink shirt, right? And I try.
Yeah, it's just competition.
Exactly. But I try to pretend that I'm married, right? And I look at it and I say, now, what does government say to me? What do people say to me? Here I am as a girl, right? I'll put that bow back on my hair.
Yes.
Right?
A lovely nail shot.
Now, I'm being told what to do, what to think, whether I can smoke, whether I'm smoking too much, what to drink, right? You're telling me how much I can spend on certain things. You're taking half my money, right? You're telling me what I can read. You're telling me what I can watch. You really sound like a really abusive partner. And so I'm breaking up and I'm divorcing you, government, and I'm out of here, right? Because if this was actually a relationship, it would be considered...
You would have taken half the GDP with you if it was a real relationship.
Well, the family court would have taken care of the other half too, probably.
Yeah, exactly.
Seriously, if this was if you considered government, because you really should consider government to be part of your life, right? Because if you are a high income earner, they take close to half. If you get divorced, they take close to half as well. So,
and if you die, they're about to take another half.
Yeah. Right. And also, every time you spend money, they're going to take a bit of that as well. So you should look at government
how you do it.
Relationship. Would you marry the Australian government? If the answer is no, then don't marry the Australian government, get a divorce. If you think that this is an abusive relationship if the Australian government was a person, which I do, then why put up with it? Leave. Go to a safe house in Dubai or Monaco.
Well, there'll be no editing here. This is The Greater Wealth here on Edge Radio Australia, while he dies quietly in the background. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Enjoy yourself in the undisclosed, very comfortable, lovely location. I know the view on the other side that we can't see, and it's pretty spectacular. So I'm glad you're enjoying yourself down there. When you're back in Perth, we'll catch up for a bit of a drink, I feel.